Thank you very much, Ms. Hackshaw, and thanks very much to the media for affording us this opportunity. Our meeting has been so productive and so engaging. It has meant that the timing has been able to, has required us to shift our agenda items, and I that our President of Council, Honorable Chikjero Twea, who's Minister of Industrialization and Trade and Small and Medium Enterprise Development of Namibia, is unable to be here. But we're very happy that Minister Nandcoomar, who is very knowledgeable on the matters we want to emphasize. The Secretariat is happy with the attendance and the large number of ministers who have come to this council meeting, because it is a very important council meeting in the sense that it reviews and received a report on our negotiations on the post-Cotonou negotiations, which has made significant progress in looking at questions of human rights, which is playing a big focus in terms of people-centered development. We've also looked at matters relating to culture and health in the social sectors, and we're now concerned with the more complicated and difficult issues that would touch on migration and development and mobility. But the progress has been so encouraging, and tomorrow we will have another joint session in negotiations. So while post-Cotonou was given an update, more substantively, this council was able to look at the legal and administrative procedures that have to be observed for the appointment of a new Secretary General. This is the council that has been able to confirm that the next Secretary General, beginning on the 1st of March 2020, will be elected from the Southern Africa region. Therefore, the Southern Africa region will put in train a process by which applications will come to the Secretariat to confirm all the particulars in terms of the candidates, and a full timetable is articulated until we go to the next council, which is a council we anticipate preceding a summit in later this part of this year, very likely early December. So other than that aspect of our legal procedures, as you know, the report of the Committee of Ambassadors is very extensive, and my own report as Secretary General was able to touch on the way in which we're intensifying intra-ACP cooperation. It's one of our strategic objectives. What was repeatedly referred to is a concern that we deal not only with the political issues in terms of political aspects, but we look at economic integration, and we look at economic integration in terms that lead to the industrialization. Primarily, we've had trade cooperation and development assistance. Now, when we merge those two, we see development finance being important for us to be able to look at science, technology, innovation, and make it possible to industrialize. We want to be able to see the primary commodities, a wide range of commodities. Sugar, distinguished way in which it is handled in Mauritius, has moved right up the value chain. In fact, for direct consumption sugars, sugar syrups, and also the byproducts, as I refer to the capacity that the research has been done in Mauritius to look at biodegradable plastics coming out from the biomass. So there's no waste there. We're also proud that other sugar exporting countries are looking increasingly to look at value addition, and our other commodities, certainly cocoa now is looking for value addition. That's why industrialization is playing a part. So leaving the trade and the development finance, we're concerned that a major issue affecting our policy and the space that our countries want to have is dealing with development finance and financial policies. And therefore, that brings us to questions that arise around tax matters and the taxation. Our fiscal measures have, of course, to be very transparent, to observe rules and regulations, but at the same time, we are not comfortable with the way in which this is being addressed, and we want to find an appropriate dialogue to have that resolved so that the development of our countries and the reputation of our countries in dealing with fiscal matters does not become tarnished and adversely affect our development. It is for that reason that Minister Bodha Nandcoomar has been able to chair the ad hoc ministerial contact group on tax matters and can bring the media up to date on how we're progressing on that matter. So Minister may want to address the media.
Thank you. Thank you, Secretary General, members of the media. I have the honor to address you after the the meeting which I chaired as regards to the list of countries which are considered to be non-cooperative jurisdiction for tax purposes. As you are aware, there are three lists: a white list, a black list, and a gray list. In fact, what has happened is that we had a number of countries on the black list, about 5, and 3 of them have been removed in March 2019, but 6 others have been added to that list for non-fulfillment of the commitments which were being asked to be for non-compliance to a number of measures which they had promised they would be taking. Now, what's the impact of this? The impact of this is the fact that we have a tax regime, and you have the imposition, you have the funds which come from this tax regime, and it impacts very negatively on the economy because this is a pillar of the economy. It impacts in a very drastic manner on the capacity of the country to raise taxes. Now, what has happened is that there is another issue, is that this was done in a very arbitrary manner. It was done in a very arbitrary manner, in a very unilateral manner, and we have a whole issue of predictability because of the flow of investments, and the countries, in fact, like Mauritius, we find ourselves in a position where, with the other ACP states, we find ourselves in a position where there's no predictability as regards to the flow of FDI, that is foreign direct investment. And when we have this unilateral approach, first of all, then the imbalanced assessment of the tax regimes, and we have another issue is that we have a regime which is being implemented by the OECD, then you have another regime which is being implemented by the European Union, then you have another regime which is being implemented by some member states within the European Union. So at the end of the day, the question is, who has the competence to establish that we are compliant? And that's where the issue has risen, and the fact that how do we get out of this list, and the fact that this is being done in a very unilateral manner. So that's why we are saying that this is non-compliant with the spirit and the letter of the Article 12 of the Cotonou Agreement, where there should be dialogue, because we are we have a long-standing partnership with the European Union over a number of years, and this has worked beautifully. So on this issue of tax regime, we have requested for a dialogue so that we can sit down together and find solutions. Now, the letters have been exchanged with the European Union co-president of the ACP EU Council of Ministers, and I'm very happy to say that we have received a correspondence today, dated the 12th of May, where the chairperson of the ACP EU Council of Ministers, Mr. Malescanu, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Romania, who has written that tomorrow we are having in the context of the ACP EU Committee on Development Finance Cooperation, this will offer an appropriate setting for an active exchange of views on the matter. When this matter has been raised a few times, and the issue, everybody is aware that in the spirit of dialogue we'll be able to find a solution, because otherwise some of the members here in the discussions, we came with a proposal that, first of all, we should have a dialogue. The second is that we should have a regime which is accepted by everybody, and this can be done at the level of the United Nations. One of the member states, they mentioned that International Monetary Fund, for example, so that we have a regime where everybody is comfortable and everybody has a visibility, so that they can, if they are not compliant to that regime, they can take up measures at the level of their own budgets, at their own financial fiscal policy, so that they become compliant, because it's not easy for a state to take fiscal measures, because of some have to go to parliament, some can do it easily in their budget speeches, but in many states they have to go to parliament, they have to go to cabinet, so this becomes very complicated for the member states. So we are advocating for dialogue, but we're also advocating for sustainability and predictability, and to have a regime, to have criteria which are established at the highest level, and so that everybody is aware of it and we can be compliant with it. And I sincerely believe, Secretary General, that with the spirit of dialogue that has now been established, hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to come up with a solution in such a way that we don't have this unilateral listing, which has been very, which have jeopardized many of the fiscal sector in many of our countries.
Very nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nandcoomar.
Well, just to wind it up with a few other points I think that we could mention. The stage at which we have reached shows that the partnership is strong, it's able to deal with complex issues, and is prepared to look at the ways in which we can resolve them. And that's the great factor of this, for now, 44 years of the relationship between the European Union and the ACP group of states. We also see that this is a great occasion in which the ACP, looking to post-2020, will be finding ways more and more to multilateralize and to protect the multilateral institutions. The ACP has fought significantly in the World Trade Organization to ensure that special and differential treatment, in keeping with the Doha principles that were established in 1994, that we should see that developing countries cannot be subjected to the same discipline of developed countries. And while that is being addressed in the Doha negotiations and has reached to some extent, I don't think, a very happy turn of events now, we really want to see how the reform of the WTO will take place. The reform so that the dispute settlement body will still continue to function, because we must have, contrary to what some of the countries, such as the United States and Japan, are thinking of, we can move away from that and look at digitization, look at e-commerce as new items. But we feel that development has to play a part, and trade must be an instrument of development. And for trade to be an instrument of development, our fiscal policy is so important. So we see the ultimate route is to multilateralize this question of financial, fiscal policies and trade matters. That is why the role that we play in Geneva, we want to see a role played more extensively on international arenas. And that is why the framework for our post-Cotonou negotiations is within the Sustainable Development Goals. And the first one of which, of course, is looking at eradicating poverty. We see poverty, therefore, in a very comprehensive way. We see poverty taking account of health, and we're introducing what was referred to in health systems and how the health systems can be strengthened. We also see it as ways by which we contribute to AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis funding. But we also want to see that the training that are provided to medical personnel can look at what happens in one country and share those experiences and best practices from different countries. It is already taking place between South Africa, Ghana, and Kenya. So many areas in terms of development are being seen in a comprehensive way that we want to move forward on. I think that also this council in particular wants to make sure that we lay a good platform in terms of how we strengthen intra-ACP cooperation. And that is why a consultation that was held in Barbados, I just recently referred to in my report, is bringing together as an interregional coordination committee all the regional economic communities and regional integration organizations, so that African Union, ACP, ECOWAS, COMESA, and others would look at ways by which they complement each other in terms of dealing with the issues of concern for the countries in a regional basis. Because the regions now are playing a very significant role. They're dealing with peace and security, they have a focus on trade, and now we see development cooperation. Thematic areas related to the Sustainable Development Goals is important. One of which we would want to go to much more intensively is this question of the blue economy. And one of our member states. As you know, Kenya hosted a major conference on the sustainable blue economy, and is of course great significance to the Pacific, is great significance to our island states in the Caribbean, but also to coastal states in Africa. So we've seen our ocean governance as that SDG, as one in which we will look at in terms of relating to fishing, to also protecting the oceans, but also seeing the resources of coastal areas, and it links with tourism and movement of trade across the oceans. So in other words, in a phased way, the ACP is reorganizing, reconfiguring itself to focus specifically on how we can accomplish the SDGs. And then playing a role with the European Union is most important. We're doing that successfully already in climate change, and that's how we'll go down the ladder into other areas of sustainable development goals and address overall poverty and development of our countries. And that is really the basis on which the ACP was set up in 1975. Which brings us to the fact that we are looking to revise the Georgetown Agreement, which is our constitutional basis, to make it much more modern in terms of how it is relating to its provisions for membership of our member states, and also to see ways in which we will be collaborating with other countries, such as India, such as Brazil. And while you're here with us now, I hope you'll also be coming back on June the 7th, when we observe ACP Day, because we intend to have a theme addressing the deepening of our partnership with Europe, but also diversifying our partnership. And already Peru, the government of Peru, is very keen on fishing and the ocean. And also we will work with India related to the question of customs and tariffs, but also for the technology that India has been able to produce in many ways, and also Brazil, of course, as part of the BRICS, in which we have a technical cooperation program already. So we're looking forward in a phased way in advancing the work we do in the ACP to ensure the development and the benefits go to our people across the 3 continents of Africa, the Americas, and of course the Pacific Oceania. So I want to say thanks very much if that's helpful, but if there are a few questions we should respond to, we should be able to have some time for that.
Thank you, SG. Are there any questions?
J'ai une question, je m'exprime mieux en français.
I have a question. I prefer asking it in French. Now that the ACP group and the European Union have agreed on common grounds for the post-Cotonou agreement, while defining the various regional pillars and the various needs of the pillars, I would like to know whether there will also be trade agreements pertaining to each pillar. That's my first question. The second question is whether these pillars and these agreements, if there are any, will be based on the WTO rules. The successor agreement is articulated around a foundation which will be an overarching document that will define the overall relationship. And then within that, there will be various regional pillars. In fact, there will be 3 of them, because there are specificities within our regions. And today, there's a framework agreement that will be the foundation, which will include pillars on specificities. For example, the needs of Africa and the problems Africa is facing are not the same as other regions. Africa has the issue of migration, which is very important for Europe, which is not necessarily the case for the Pacific or the Caribbean. So there will be a foundation, and around the foundation there will be various pillars articulated on the issue of international trade, and international trade must be governed by the WTO rules and principles. We cannot have a trade regime between the European Union and ACP countries that run counter to the WTO rules. That would not be possible. Otherwise, what will happen is there will be countries that will turn to the WTO to denounce the breaching of the rules of the WTO. For a long time now, there's also been a trade relation that's a long standing relation. There are many protocols, and these protocols have to be regulated and be in compliance with WTO rules. For example, there used to be a sugar protocol, but that's now in the free market. But discussions continue, and within each region there will be priorities. But trade will always be the foundation, and within the foundation there will be the major issues that should be dealt with internationally, globally, issues of climate change, environmental issues, that's global issues, and the foundation can deal with all of those issues, and then there will be specific pillars that will be adapted to various regions, the respective regions.
Ma deuxième question.
My second question concerns the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that will come into force on 30 September this year. You talked about intra-regional trade to boost interregional integration. Will there be a harmonization of custom tariffs? That's my first question. And secondly, for the countries that do not produce, will they be subject to this region? This is a real challenge of interregional trade. The custom tariffs are very high. Custom duties, if they are removed, what will happen to the countries that depend on this income from custom resources? We have a free trade agreement that is always there. There are countries that impose tariffs, and these tariffs enable them to get revenue, which is crucial for those countries' budgets. So indeed, the Continental Free Trade Agreement will come into force, but it will take a long time. There are technical issues. There's a regime where each country must select the sensitive products. There's a certain level of protectionism, if I may call it that enable these countries to focus on a specific product. For country A, for example, there could be tariffs that only applied up to 10%, for example. Now, when the treaty comes into force, each member state must come up with a list of 90% and make a proposal. So here we can speak about a certain level of harmonization among products, and then there will be the 10% for the sensitive products where a different custom tariff can be applicable. And then there's also continental trade. It's already working very well at the level of SADC. The 14 SADC countries are already enjoying freedom of movement, goods and services. So the idea is to boost continental trade. And there are so much potential. The example of regional units that exist already within East Africa or West Africa or Southern Africa, we get an idea that such trade is possible. But to some extent, the countries need to be able to protect sensitive products. And we have the possibility to do so for 10% of our imports. But it is a lengthy process. I attended the Council of Ministers meeting last week. We need to establish the 90% of products that can be subject to free trade.
Mais si vous voulez, sur cela.
If I may add on the tax regime, I can sum it up. There are 3 lists, and we consider this list prepared in an arbitrary way. unilaterally. We consider the European Union as a partner. We work in a spirit of dialogue according to Article 12 of the Cotonou Agreement. We focus on dialogue. That is what should be done. We cannot unilaterally put countries on a list and we give the country a certain number of obligations, and if the country is not in compliance, you can be downgraded and go from the grey list to a black list. And the impact on the economies of the country is significant. So our message is we need to be in compliance with the spirit and letter of the Cotonou Agreement, which is dialogue. And here we've received a letter from the President of the ACP EU Council of Ministers, and tomorrow and the day after we will be able to table this issue and ensure that there's no unilateral decision making, that we find for ourselves on the list. We know how it happens for investment. When there's a list, we are sort of a red flag, and it's detrimental to the reputation and the image of a country, and it can be disastrous. So we're calling for dialogue, and we're calling for visibility. That means clear criteria. Organizations that tomorrow could establish criteria must know that it's a level of United Nations where a criteria can be accepted, and then any jurisdiction should attempt to be in compliance with the criteria. And if not, the country should have time to adapt. We don't change from a tax regime overnight. It can happen in one fiscal year, perhaps, but it's a lengthy and a complex process, so we need flexibility, we need to focus on job creation. We cannot tell us that we need to make efforts on the one hand to attract investment, and on the other hand we say, well, our tax regime is not in compliance, because the principle is easy. We have tax regimes that are more attractive in some countries, so they attract investment. The European Union is saying because the tax regime in Europe is more complex, well, rather investors turn to these countries. So this is obviously compromising the income in European states. But we want to be attractive. We want to attract investment, and there are many ways of attracting investment. We need to have tax regimes enabling us to attract investment, enable our industrialization. It's a matter of survival. We want to enable our developing economies to industrialize, to attract investment, to create jobs, and to arrive at sustainable development. I would like to know whether the free trade area can protect it from the European Union. We know in terms of the agreement with the European Union, the EPAs, for example, the European Union completely opened its borders. There are no custom duties. So the free trade agreement is still in its infancy. We would like to know how this trade can bear fruit in Africa. How will the free trade agreement protect itself against European competition? There are some billion consumers in Africa tomorrow, so the potential within the continent is great. That's why free trade is important. But in fact, there's a lack of knowledge of products. We've always thought that products from the south have always to look at the European market, but in the future, there will be a huge demand on the continent. Avocados from Kenya, if I can give an example, come to Mauritius. We use it in tourism, in the tourism industry. So we have good examples from SADC, and this needs to be replicated, and we have to have the possibility of supply. Sometimes there are only 2 or 3 hours of flights separating us, but we don't use that to supply these products. So SADC is a very good example where it works well with industrialized products, agricultural products, and other regions also. It's working very well. So the idea is to list all the products that can be accessible for the the various countries and then boost that trade.
Very much, Minister. I think we have a much better idea of some of the road ahead that we and the work that we still have to do in terms of, as the SG mentioned, multilateralization and also the intensification of our own intra-ACP trade. So there's a lot to do, and hopefully we will get some out of this meeting. We will have some actual results coming out of what comes up later this week. So let's hope. Thank you everyone for assisting us and coming out to this press briefing. Thank you, SG, for taking the time out. And now I know they have to go back to finalize this meeting. So thank you, everyone. Good afternoon.